What is up, everyone? I am TST's the Mudman, and it's time to figure out what we are going to play this weekend ranked in Gods Unchained. But first, the same giveaway we were doing last week is still going on. 10 lucky commenters will be winning 6.9 gods, courtesy of my teammate and mortal councilman Caution Fun. Caution Fun is giving away his entire councilman salary to the members of the TST community. All you have to do is subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment your Discord name, and what deck you'll be playing over the weekend. These 10 lucky winners were picked last week. You could be the lucky winners this week. All of the champions are picked live on Twitch. The various channels will be in the description of this video. Good luck, everyone, and let's get right back into it. So the meta is pretty much unchanged from last week. At Mythic rank, Magic is still the most popular god. It's incredibly versatile. You can be Tempo Magic, you can be Control Magic, you can be Coronet Magic, and all of the archetypes are very powerful. When you run into Deception this week, it can either be Aggressive Deception or Mid-Range Control Deception. Both archetypes are very powerful, so like most weeks, you're going to want to look up your opponent when you run into Deception. Death, like Magic, has many archetypes. There's zombies, Anubians, over the lines, classic board wipe death, Trial of the Underworld board wipe death, but zombies are definitely the most common of the death archetypes, and you'll know you're running into a zombie opponent when they pick the Soulburn God Power. Only zombie decks pick Soulburn. Next up is Nature. Nature is the same as it's always been. It's going to be aggressive, wild Nature when you run into them this weekend. Then we have Light. Light can be either Zoo Light or Control Light. Both archetypes are very powerful. Zoo Light is far more common than Control Light, but Control Light is incredibly strong. And finally, we have War. Oh, actually, one more thing about Light. If you see they pick the Summon Acolyte God Power, they're most likely going to be Zoo Light. And if they pick the Heal God Power, they're probably Control Light. So you can make your mulligan decisions after you see the God Power selection. And then finally, we have the least popular god in War, which can either be very aggressive creature-oriented Viking war decks or the very expensive control-oriented war decks. But now that we've done this brief overview of the meta, let's jump into some lists you might want to play this weekend. Alright, let's start things off with the most popular god in Magic. This week I have a Tempo Magic list for you. This deck was made by Raihan, and it's a fairly standard Tempo Magic list. Of course, we have some of the new Light's Verdict cards in here. We have a copy of Blade of White Plains. We talked about this card like crazy last week, so there's no reason to gush about it this week. It destroys creatures with 3 or less attack, which includes Guild Enforcer. It draws cards. It's incredibly powerful. He also has one copy of Poetic Knowledge, another incredibly powerful card. You can pick any spell from your Void, put it into your hand, it costs 0, you obliterate cards from the top of your deck, equal to that card's base casting cost, so you can just have, more copies of your powerful cards like Unbound Flames or Worm Breath or what have you. Both those cards are incredibly powerful. It's a little strange that he only has one copy of each. As you can see, he only runs one copy of Star Shard Bolt and one White Plains. A lot of players are removing their Star Shard Bolts and replacing them with the Blades of White Plains, primarily because the Star Shard Bolts, one of its main functions was you pair it with some spell boost to get rid of Guild Enforcers. Now there is this great Guild Enforcer answer in White Plains. So as you can see, we have the one Star Shard Bolt and the one White Plains for all those Guild Enforcers. And then there's one Poetic Knowledge. In my opinion, you always want 2 Poetic Knowledges. Just seems so good. You get your best cards again. That being said, none of these cards in the deck are weak, so removing anything is challenging. If you want to put in a second White Plains or a second Poetic Knowledge, you're probably removing Leyhorde Hatchlings. Well, actually, if you're going to put in the second White Plains, you're going to get rid of the second Star Shard Bolt. But if you wanted to put another Poetic Knowledge, I would recommend removing a Leyhorde Hatchling. That being said, Leyhorde Hatchling and Knowledge are incredibly different cards. So you might just want to go with Raihan's deck here, tried and true. He's played 43 games with a 90% win rate. So this is definitely the type of deck that can win the weekend ranked event. And if you're a fan of Tempo Magic, a list like this should do very well. But if you like the Control Magic archetypes and the Combo Magic archetypes, we've got you covered in last week's video. Like I said at the beginning of this video, the meta hasn't changed much, so the Combo and Control decks from last week are just as relevant this week as they were before. So if this type of Magic deck isn't your cup of tea, check out last week's video for those other archetypes. But now let's jump into the next god. And next up we have Deception. This is a mid-range Deception list made by 3 question marks. this was the best performing Deception deck of last weekend ranked event, and it's just a pretty normal mid-range Deception deck. You have all your good early game creatures and spells. Decks with this high of a curve rarely have Fermentari Instigator, so that's interesting, but drawing cards is always good. But for the most part, this is just normal Deception stuff. Their early game creatures are really strong, their spells are strong, and they steal your NFTs, or they steal your opponent's NFTs, so it beats pretty much any combo deck, very strong against any control deck, and then their aggressive cards have hidden so they can outrace a lot of other decks. Deception has been performing really well for the past couple of weeks, so if you're a fan of Deception, a list like this could be a great choice this week. Alright, now we have Board Wipe Death, and although this says many question marks, it actually translates to Moon Key. And this is not your classic Board Wipe Death deck. It doesn't have a lot of the like sleep and mill stuff. Instead, this deck revolves around Trial of the Underworld. And it's been a few months since we've discussed Trial of the Underworld. It's been like a fringe sub-archetype of Board Wipe Death for a while. I think Party Boy Craig's deck was the last time we discussed Trial of the Underworld. If you are uninitiated, it's an 8-mana spell. You summon a 5-mana creature, 6-mana creature, 7-mana creature, and 8-mana creature from the Void. Give it Soulless. It can be from either player's Void, and you get them all. So obviously, that's far more, mana than just 8, as far as creatures you're getting, so it's a big stat dump. The last time we talked about Trial of the Underworld, it was because Kaya had recently entered the game, so not only could you get a bunch of stats on the board, the Kaya would deal 8 damage divided randomly, and, destroying creatures and getting lots of stats in play is very, very powerful. However, there is a new creature from Light's Verdict that's also empowering the Trial of the Underworld archetype, and that card is Blade of White Plains. This card, when a creature that is less powerful than Blade of White Plains is destroyed, you get to draw a card, and that effect can happen once per turn. So when you play your Trial of the Underworld, your 5-mana creature will be that aforementioned White Plane. Your 6-mana creature will either be Kaya or Neferu, both of which deal damage immediately. They'll probably destroy a creature, and then you'll probably draw a card. So in this new Trial of the Underworld, you'll be getting a Helion Elite, either a Helmna or a Demo, a Kaya dealing 8 damage to your opponent, and then also drawing a card and threatening to draw cards more. So, a very fun, huge power turn for Board Wipe Death. There is one big issue with this archetype. This is probably the most cutthroatable deck in the entire game. Like I just said, Trial of the Underworld takes creatures from any Void. It doesn't matter if it's your Void or your opponent's, so if you happen to be playing Deception, you can just cutthroat their Trial of the Underworld, and then you get to play it. You get all the great creatures they've been playing all game, and then they get Soulless, so they get nothing. It's incredibly cutthroatable, but besides that, it's a very fun archetype. You can ramp incredibly quickly. You have your 2 Fanatics, you have your 2 Ruined Asps, you have your 2 Half-Lives, which can get back the Ruined Asps, and then, of course, we have an immense amount of healing with the 2 Return to Caves, so your aggro opponents can't kill you, and you have the ultimate combo of Return to Caves plus Helmna for big, big damage. All in all, this is just like a fun, different twist on Board Wipe Death. This deck has been performing very well. Moonkey has played 44 games with a 77% win rate, so a list like this should perform very well over this weekend ranked event. And now we have Fake Muse's Aggro Nature deck, or as he calls it, Degen Regen Nature. And Fake Muse, he looked at the nature god, he grabbed his wallet, threw it right at the god, and boom! 100% win rate over 4 games. For the most part, this is a fairly standard aggressive nature deck. Lots of early game creatures, and then some big buff cards in Wildfire and Trial of the Hydra. But Fake Muse has thrown in some very powerful and very expensive cards in here as well. We have Blade of White Plains, the card that really should be in every deck. If you have them, it's incredibly powerful. Believe it or not, it's good in nature too. But Fake Muse has also thrown in the Martyr of White Plains, which is essentially just 2 frontline creatures, and you get one of your creatures back. There are a handful of very powerful creatures in this deck that you would love to get back in your hand, some of which being something like Finian Fruitbearer, your Gloam Druids, which is another rare inclusion for aggressive nature decks. It was popular, I guess, like last year, just a 2-mana 2/2 that buffs all of your confused creatures. Nature has lots of confused creatures, including their Animal Bond God power, so this little 2-mana creature usually does a lot of damage at some point, and you might be able to get another copy into your hand with that Blind Martyr. You can also get bonus copies of Dahlia, which was buffed like 2 or 3 patches ago. It's not the most amazing card ever, it's not going to win you games on its own, but it is going to give you a board full of small creatures that you can subsequently buff, and then maybe that wins you the game. So Dahlia may not be a win condition, but it's like a tertiary win condition. But besides that, it's just a normal, aggressive nature deck. You're playing creatures, you're buffing creatures, you're going face. But Fake Muse has proven that adding these incredibly powerful Light's Verdict cards has greatly improved his win rate. As you can see, 100% win rate for Fake Muse. So if you're a fan of nature and you have all of these cards to build this new wallet nature list, then it may perform very well this weekend ranked event. Alright, next up we have Light. I have two different Light decks to show you today. We're going to start things off with J-Rock's Control Light list. This deck performed very well last week in ranked event. It went 16 of 18. And J-Rock's Control Light lists are always more mid-rangey than your average Control Light list. As you can see, there are no copies of Lips Are Sealed and only a single copy of Lysander's Mercy. And in lieu of those cards, we just have more creatures. Obviously, we have the new White Plains cards, both very powerful, both great and light. But the main reason I like J-Rock's builds of Control Light is since he has more creatures, he's able to be proactive in those slower matchups. He's able to actually pressure his Control Magic or Control Deception or Control War opponents and get them to 0. And then in those aggressive matchups like Nature, Zoo Light, Tempo Magic, he can use his creatures to control the board so he doesn't have to be reliant on those Lips Are Sealed and various stall tactics. That being said, we do still have some of the more powerful order cards. There's of course the 1 mana Order 2, Order 2 creatures for 3. This is a great way to beat all of the Coronet Magic decks out there. But yeah, all in all, Control Light has been very powerful for the past few months. This list performed very well. I'm a big fan of the more mid-range oriented Control Light lists, and if you are a fan of Control Light, it should go very well this weekend ranked event. But now let's take a look at some aggressive light. This is a Zoo Light list made by Clutch, and it's just it's a very standard Zoo Light list. Ever since the 5-mana AoE spell was nerfed, Zoo Light has been like a strange-ish spot. We are back to the tried and true double canonize, but for the most part this runs the same strategy that any Zoo Light list runs. As you can see, we have an abundance of cheap creatures, most of which have protected or ward or just good stats. You can then buff those creatures up. You have your Felid Janissaries, you have your Lysander Spear, which can buff creatures up multiple times, very, very powerful card. You have your Milton Theus, which can not only buff your creatures, it's also great for destroying cards like Armor Lurker or Shadow Scryer. We have our AoE buffs in Radiant Dawn, and then just good creatures all in all. Essentially, this is just a really tight list. Lots of 2-ofs. It seems very consistent. So if you're a fan of the Zoo Light archetype, Clutch's list here seems very powerful, and it should do well this weekend ranked event. Alright, and the final domain to discuss is War. This is a Control War list made by 3 question marks, and it's been a long time since we've talked about Control War. However, with the introduction of Light's Verdict, there are a few powerful new cards that are pushing this archetype back into the meta, one of which is, of course, an End to War. This is a 3-mana pick 1 spell. One of the options is remove Protected and Ward from a creature and deal 2 damage to it. The other option is obliterate any damaged creature. And then, if you have 5 or more creatures in your void, you can do both effects, which means for just 3 mana, you can completely obliterate any creature as long as it has 1 or less armor. It's just the ultimate tool for any control deck. It's very powerful, and if you're worried about getting 5 creatures in your void, don't worry. It is a very easy task to complete as long as you pick Valka's Presence God Power. Those little 1/1s love getting destroyed. But there is another thing that is pushing this archetype back into the meta. Control War has always been really great at controlling the board. They have great blitz creatures, they have great relics, they have excellent AoE spells like Carnage Sweep, which pairs excellently with Leviathan Hunter. They also have, Soul Survivor, which is great for clearing pretty much any board. But one issue that Control War has always had is they don't have a great, reason to get to high mana amounts. In the past they've played Jason, they've played Strength in Numbers, but now we have Therial the Fallen, which is a 7-mana 6/9, and it lets you delve 3 of his 3-mana 2/2 Disciples, all of which have incredibly powerful effects. So this is a new reason for War to go to the late game, and of course we always have the very cool combo of Adi making your Therial cheaper. Maybe you can play him for 6 mana, maybe you can even play him for 5, and then really go nuts. But yeah, all in all, there are a lot of creature decks roaming around. War is always great, or Control War rather, is always great for dealing with creature decks, and now we have this fun new late game card in Feral the Fallen. So if you've missed the Control War archetype, you can try out a list like triple question marks here, and you should do very well in this weekend ranked event. Alright, it is conclusion time. We talked about the stuff, we did the things. What deck should we play this weekend ranked event? And I say, no reason to fight the tides. Magic is the most popular god because Magic is really good, and Tempo Magic is my favorite of the current Magic archetypes. But whatever deck you go with, try to have fun. Tell us how you did in the TST Discord. Participate in the fun giveaway brought to you by Councilman Caution Fund in the comments below, and have a wonderful day. Hey you! Did you know that subscribing to the TST YouTube channel will increase your win rate by 6.9%? So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And while you're at it, equip Scythe of the Harvest and attack the like button directly in the face. Bye-bye!